Greetings. I'm your host, Jason Miles, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast for all returning listeners, subscribers, and of course, our very valued patrons. Thank you so much for coming back. To those new to the channel, thank you for taking a moment to check us out. If you dig what we're doing, please hit like and, of course, subscribe. It goes a very long way in promoting the channel. A quick reminder before I bring the guest in, TIR is a listener-supported program. Without y'all, we couldn't do this. If you enjoy what we do here on TIR and have the means and feel so inclined, become a patron for as little as $3 a month or $30 for the year. You can access our patron-only champagne rooms, join us for movie nights, like we've been having a lot more of lately, have access to the TIR Discord, and you get the satisfaction of knowing that you helped contribute to the insanity that is TIR. Also, we will be doing our normal Saturday show on Sunday. We'll be doing our third installment of our Dating on the Left series. I'll be joined once again with Cynthia. And if all goes well, we'll have the phone lines open so we can hear your dating horror stories. It's like old school love lines, but without a medical doctor. So don't call if your hog is swollen and green stuff is coming out. It's obviously infected. Go to a doctor. You're a weirdo. Now, let's talk about rich pricks and nationalizing their subsidized monopolies. Why Starlink and SpaceX should be nationalized. This month marks 2 years since OceanGate's Titan submersible imploded on its way 3,800 meters to the ocean floor to see the remains of the Titanic. This was a billionaire-funded disaster that cost the lives of everyone on board, including OceanGate's CEO, Stockton Rush. While many people, maybe even people that watch shows like this, found some brief joy in the schadenfreude of this disaster, the hubris of the ultra-wealthy, defying all safety measures and any regulations to have an expensive experience is frightening. Bigger than the temporary giggles, this was a perfect example of the folly of the public-private partnerships that have become a hallmark of neoliberalism. Ralph Nader spent his career rallying the proletariat against corporate greed, even losing his grandniece to the Ethiopian Airlines crash of the Boeing 737 MAX 8 aircraft. The safety of customers or workers has never been high on the list of concerns for the lords of capital. From cigarettes to planes, profits will always supersede public good. Elon Musk has made a fortune off the backs of tax-funded subsidies for his various businesses, and he used part of that fortune to finance Donald Trump's presidential campaign. Once Trump was in office, Elon Musk was rewarded for his financial backing by being allowed to form his efficiency agency, Doge. Doge's main function is to cut government bloat, something many Americans find to be a problem with a system they don't trust. Quickly, Musk and Doge went on a mission to destroy vulnerable government services with clandestine hopes of privatization under the guise of saving taxpayer dollars. Musk and Doge have wreaked havoc on everything from air traffic control to Medicaid. But all things must come to an end. The Musk and Trump bromance has come to an end, and Elon has left Doge as his reputation has morphed from Silicon Valley visionary to one of the most repugnant figures in politics. He and Donald Trump have become must-see reality TV, a sad reflection of politics in 2025. The two men are having a public feud via social media. While this feud persists, there's one thing that people should be concerned about: what Musk controls with his Starlink satellites and his federally funded SpaceX. As our guest today states in his latest for Jacobin, quote, in the last quarter of 2023, a jaw-dropping 90% of pounds sent into orbit were put there by SpaceX, and SpaceX's operation of the Starlink service turns the existence of a heavily state-subsidized private space program, which is bad enough, into something far worse. Whatever you think of the war in Ukraine, for example, it's absurd that Elon Musk's personal decisions about sharing Starlink terminals with the Ukrainian military make a real difference to the course of that war. Starlink being owned by SpaceX and SpaceX being owned by Musk means that a single oligarch de facto gets to set his own privatized foreign policy, unquote. So join us in our discussion with Ben Burgis about why oligarchical ownership of large swaths of industry affects foreign policy and gives unregulated and undemocratic control to individuals. In this regard, we are all on the Titan, whether we want to be or not, on a death voyage to the bottom. To have this cheery conversation with me is my homie, my dog, my neighbor, the host of Give Them an Argument, Ben Burgis.
Wow, the death voyage to the bottom of the sea. All right, let's do it.
Was that a good one? Did you like that one?
No, that was very good.
Well, let's start with the big question. Why should Starlink and SpaceX be nationalized? What's at stake if they're not?
Yeah, I mean, I think pulling back the camera a little bit here, it does, I do get that the sort of default reaction to Trump and Musk falling out is just to think it's hilarious, which is certainly correct as far as it goes. It is very funny that that these guys, like Musk, was so central to the early days of the second Trump administration, and I mean, even saying that sentence, it's kind of amazing to have to remind yourself that Trump has been president again for less than 5 months. It seems like a lot longer than that, but he was central enough that he did a press conference, like standing in the Oval Office while Trump was just kind of sitting looking at him. Trump in his pseudo State of the Union thing right after he took office was like actually at one point had everybody turn around so they could give a standing ovation to Elon Musk. And of course, I mean, more substantively, Elon had carte blanche to go into all these federal agencies and look at all the records and slash and burn, right? To essentially suspend the operations of entire federal agencies, which were maybe not so coincidentally, a lot of those were ones that had investigated him and his companies. And then, of course, they had this catastrophic falling out to the point that that Trump has posted on social media about how maybe he should get rid of all of Elon's government contracts. And Elon posted on Twitter, he's since deleted this, but he posted on Twitter that Trump is in the Epstein files. And he also like did a little quote tweet agreement with somebody saying that Trump should be impeached. So it's again, everybody kind of saw it coming. The two biggest egos in the country were going to come into conflict with each other sooner or later. And I think much like the metaphor in your opening monologue, I think lots of people just sort of feel nothing but Schadenfreude about it, and that makes perfect sense to me. Let them fight, but I do think that if you look at the threats and counter threats that were going on between these two guys, they are actually pretty revealing about what's at stake in all of this that might be more important than any of this, right? That the fact that Trump, well, he didn't tweet, he posted on Truth Social, Truthed, right? Truthed. Trump truthed that he might have to cancel all of Elon's government contracts. And then Elon responded, "Oh, okay. Well, in that case, we might have to decommission the Dragon spacecraft, which is what actually takes astronauts on and off of the International Space Station." Yeah, right, exactly. And it's like, oh, wait a second, right? Like, yeah, put down the popcorn for just a second and track what's going on here, because these threats and counter threats, like what they're sort of accidentally revealing or reminding us of, is that this one guy, right? This one super duper oligarch, who, and I mean, really, like, that's not hyperbole. If you compare any of the Russian guys we call oligarchs to Elon Musk, like they're all, they're all, though, like, compared to him, they all might as well be like guys who own like chains of local car dealerships or something.
Yeah.
Like, he has an unfathomable amount of money, right? Like, I mean, at one point he might have like I know his businesses have suffered in the last several months, so I don't know what the current number is, but there was a time very recently when his wealth was estimated at $455 billion, right? Which is
Insane.
just literally an amount of money. I think it's hard to wrap your head around like how much that is. That I mean, I always I always say my stupid little thing to like illustrate how much money 1 billion is,
Hmm.
right? That if you imagine like some long-lived like immortal being, right? Like let's say a vampire, came to the New World with Christopher Columbus in 1492 and somehow managed to accumulate the equivalent of 1,000 American dollars every single day thereafter. Um, and just I don't know, maybe like stack the money in coffins or something. Um, like within like a little over about 3 years, right? The vampire would be a millionaire. Um, right now in 2025, the vampire would be nowhere near being a billionaire,
That's
right?
so that's it's insane to think about because also too, um, you can't tell a person that has, you know, $200,000 that maybe they're doing something wrong. Like if you are a self-employed businessman, um, and you're like, "Hey, John, maybe you're going in the wrong direction." No, 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 no. I run a business. And I have 10 trucks. I don't think you know me. I know what I'm doing here. I don't need a map.
Yeah,
Um, it goes the same way with these gajillionaires. Recently, I was talking with Teray about the Titan, because I guess there's some documentaries about the Ocean Gate tragedy.
yeah,
How does the Ocean Gate tragedy illustrate the broader risks of neoliberal public-private partnerships?
yeah. Yeah, right. And like so in this case, just to circle back around, to the point, like this particular right public-private, like set of public-private partnerships we've got going right now with Elon means that this one guy, right, this one super duper oligarch, um, is personally in control of. I mean, really, like when you get right down to it. I mean, you read out some of the numbers from the article in your opening monologue. Like this one guy is personally in control of a ridiculously massive percentage of just how the human race in general is interacting with outer space. Right? Like
Yeah.
that, you know, that I mean, I'm sure like, okay, so that number was for the last quarter of 2023. And I was getting it from Matt Stoller, and I'm sure he was like citing that because it's like the highest, the quarter where the number was highest. But like, let's say normally it's only like 40%, right? It's like, okay, so 40% of what the human species has been putting into space is being put into space by companies owned by the company owned by this one dude, right?
Mhm.
And again, the Starlink, satellite internet stuff, it's just the one dude. And this just strikes me. I mean, look, obviously, I I mean, like I'm a crazy radical socialist. I want to nationalize all kinds of things, but like the point is that even if you're not, right, even if you don't start from that point of view, um, you should like I think there's like a very straightforward kind of normie case here that this shouldn't be private because you like even like the idea that this like militarily important satellite in internet infrastructure, the idea that the interaction right between the human species and what goes on outside the planet, right, that like so much of it is controlled by this guy, is it really is just like whatever, as presidents come and go. Trump's probably not even going to live very long. And if anybody from the FBI is watching this, that's not a threat. I just mean like he eats like shit. He's very old, right? But,
Yeah, please don't make it hard for me to return back into the country when that is not the anal probe you were looking for. That's not how you want to get your salad tossed for 4th of
yeah,
July.
yeah. Tell you what, though, after the last, like when I say this, I'm kind of joking, but I'm also kind of not, right? It's like I've been telling, because I've been in LA for like the last like week and a half or something. I keep telling people, man, I cannot wait for this weekend when I get to drive back to like the relatively stable democracy.
Yeah, the stable democracy of Mexico, where there's a military checkpoint at the corner of the hill. They literally stopped me today.
Yeah,
Rolled
yeah,
down the window. The dude shook my hand as the other guy had the M16 in front of me. Or sorry, the AR. And
AR-15, yeah.
yeah, and he was like, in Spanish, he's like, where you coming from? I was like,
Oh my God.
¿Tú vives aquí en Terrazas del Pacífico?
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, I mean, that is to some extent theater. Like, I mean, it's annoying,
Yeah.
right? But like, I mean, and don't get me wrong, I'm very happy about this. I think if Mexico like really swung back to doing what they were like the guy before AMLO was doing, right? I mean, that would as far as the war on drugs go, that would be a catastrophe. I mean, it was first time, right? So I'm happy that they're keeping it to just sort of making a bigger show of
Mhm.
of normal enforcement stuff. I did kind of wish the bigger show wasn't right next to where I live.
We happen to live near the military base and built-in safety.
Um,
Can you kind of explain how Elon Musk became the new face, if you will, of privatized tech empires? How he reflects kind of the deeper structural issues within capitalism that allow someone to accumulate that much wealth.
Yeah, right. I mean, look, that like bottom line, I would just say, I mean, like starting at the end of the question, I mean, forget Elon for a second, just the capitalism part, right? I mean, that there is a level of wealth inequality that you really do kind of need capitalism for, right? That like, I mean, I don't know. I'm thinking here of like Jordan Peterson. I'm not going to do my Kermit the Frog impression, but like saying like, oh, it's like, oh, these people, inequality long before capitalism, right? And it's like, yeah, of course there was, right? There were lords and serfs and slaves and slave owners and all of that stuff, but the degree of inequality that you get is in a sense relatively unique, right? Because in previous economic systems, the exploiting class was only trying to take enough that sort of they and their families and their courts and retainers or whatever knights could live in luxury. And of course, there's a very dramatic difference between that and conditions the people on the bottom. But there is still a difference between that and what you have under capitalism, which is this special combination of, on the one hand, like those previous like some of those previous systems in different ways we don't need to get into, but like you have the sort of economic engine of society is not in the hands of working people, that there's the separation between the working class and the ownership of basic economic wealth generating resources. So you have that on the one hand, and on the other hand, you have an exploiting class that's engaged in market competition with each other, meaning that they have this kind of never-ending incentive to accumulate, more and more wealth because, to extract more and more from the working class, because otherwise you're not, it's not just a character flaw, right, by the capitalists. It's a question of beating your competition, right? So I think that those facts alone mean that under capitalism, you're going to have an insane amount of economic inequality just just as a baseline, right? That they, because and again, I mean, like a lot of that is just like structurally having an economy that makes a separation between labor and ownership in the way that this does. I mean, I always think like I don't know to switch to from Elon to one of his fellow tech oligarchs. I always think of Amazon here. If you imagine if Amazon were like a worker cooperative, doesn't mean everybody would necessarily be paid exactly the same, right? I mean, like real life worker co-ops often don't pay everybody exactly the same. You have to pay some people a little bit more to incentivize them to take certain jobs that might involve a lot of stress and responsibility, or conversely, like dirty and dangerous jobs or whatever. But like, I'm trying to imagine like the membership meeting where somebody's like, "Hey, I was thinking about this whole company was Jeff's idea, so I think we should vote to pay him so much more than the rest of us that he can buy his own spaceship." Right? Which remember, Jeff Bezos literally does own his own spaceship. I don't think most people would vote for that, right? I think that'd be a very hard sell, right? If the workers there got to decide that. So, I think the baseline is that capitalism means that you have these crazy amounts of economic inequality. And so we all know the figures about CEOs making hundreds of times what workers do, and of course some of the really wealthiest people aren't even making it as any sort of salary or anything like that, right? They're just living off of passive income from stocks and other things. So okay, all that's true, but
Mhm.
also in the Elon case, uh, not that it's at all unique to him. He's just like maybe the most extreme example in the world right now. Uh, you also have this incredible propping up of certain big capitalist fortunes by the state. That I mean, that brings us to those public-private partnerships you're talking about before, and of course, this is the stuff that some like libertarians will say, "Oh, see, that's the bad kind of capitalism, right? The good kind of capitalism is like clean capitalism. This is the bad kind, which is crony capitalism, which is when people don't just get rich off of the free market, but they're like being propped up by state intervention." To which I would say, like, look, all capitalism is going to involve an element of crony capitalism because, for one thing, if you have immense concentrations of private wealth, people are going to find ways to turn that into political influence and get favors and all that stuff. And Elon's fortune in particular, since so much of it, comes out of SpaceX, is just a really extreme example of that right now. And he also has many, many disclosed and undisclosed, Pentagon contracts. Like there's stuff that you can kind of see, like, okay, he has a contract, but like what exactly it's for is classified, and all of that stuff is my understanding. But because he has all that, right? I mean, so like that like really helps take him out to this stratosphere of concentrated wealth. And I guess the only other thing maybe I'd say about this is it starts to feel particularly ridiculous when, again, just put aside any sort of like radical, socialist, communist, whatever kind of point, just like in really just normal people American terms, like I don't know. I mean, you think about the like every montage of like the history of the 20th century is going to include that one small step for man, and giant leap for mankind scene, right?
Mhm.
Uh, and it's like, man, if there's anything you would think that we would be doing like publicly as
Mhm.
a society, it's a space program. I mean, what is this? How do we have a privatized but still somehow space state funded space program?
I mean, wasn't that one of the big complaints that people had about NASA, that everything costs so much?
Yeah.
The
Uh,
overcharging, the government spending all this money to for things that were extremely inexpensive?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I haven't inventoried like how much they were charging for the Tang and whatnot,
Yeah.
but uh, I feel like I've not seen that in a very long time. But you remember what I'm talking about,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. Like,
Like,
in your view,
yeah,
how do we help the public understand,
yeah.
why private ownership of these public spaces, if you will, not even spaces, but these kind of public entities, is a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky because I think that part of the propaganda for it is that a lot of people really do assume that Elon is this like eccentric super genius inventor because that's his PR, right? That's how he presents himself, right? He's low rent Tony Stark. Um, and you could point out that he didn't actually like found almost any of these companies, right? I mean, he bought them and and certainly like built them up bigger, right? But I think that so I think there are a couple of things there. I think that one of them is, yeah, there is. I think there is a widespread misunderstanding of how innovation and invention happens in general. That people like the image, that's the sort of Hollywood image of how like breakthroughs and inventions happen, is that you have like the one guy who's I don't know, coming back late at night to the lab and is steady at the chalkboard, and
Yeah.
the amazing thought strikes him and whatever, um and that that there's like we just have to kind of find ways of like cultivating or helping these lonely geniuses. But like you actually start to look at some hard numbers, and it really seems like a pretty massive amount of technical innovation takes place in various kinds of publicly funded labs, and public universities, defense department, etc. um, and like there's a great, so the only TED talk I'd ever recommend anybody watch is Mariana Mazzucato. Wrote a book called The Entrepreneurial State, and she's not a socialist or anything, but like she has this thing where she'll like take out a smartphone,
I know exactly
and
what you're talking about. Yeah.
yeah, she'll like point out, look, all the things on here that make this a smartphone, not a dumb phone, right? Like actually came about through the public sector. And she'll go through like the GPS technology, the touch screen, the internet itself, etc. Right. So I think that's one barrier to that, right? There's just this widespread belief that if Elon Musk, doesn't get like $1 million every 30 seconds, then like that'll just be killing the goose that kills the golden eggs, and we won't we won't get all of our amazing new innovations. So that's like one problem. I also think that a lot of people probably aren't really tracking it at all because like the space stuff just isn't exciting in the
Mhm.
way that it used to be. I mean, I think potentially it could be, but I mean, like I think the way that it actually played out historically, I mean, so much of the excitement around the space program was like had to do with the Cold War competition with the Soviet Union, and the like initial race to get to the moon, and eventually it just seemed like, okay, like really pushing much beyond this, it's gonna take a long time, it's gonna be expensive, and whatever, right? So obviously there's been a lot of, I mean, like in the time since then, the decades since then, there are huge strides forwards in terms of satellite technology and all kinds of things. But I think that some of the sort of romanticism of space has gone away in ways that I think make it less likely for people to see how just kind of fundamentally gross it is that that we let this like this one rich guy control so much of it.
And have influence on foreign policy, which you bring up in the piece as well. I think that gets overshadowed. Why do you think
Totally.
that is? You think people just don't know how to talk about it or don't want to talk about it? I'm talking about mainstream media.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I mean, I think that, I mean, I think in general, like the way that people talk about foreign policy in mainstream American media discourse, like, just generally kind of leaves out a lot of economics. And I mean, you even think about the way that people talk about, um, like, even people who are like anti-war, right? To the extent that that's a perspective that's represented in mainstream discourse, um, it's always this sort of, it's always framed in this sort of purely ideological way, like that the reason why people would support foreign wars that ended up being disastrous is that they were, they like made a kind of ideological mistake, and like you never really get a sense of material interests driving any of it in in general, right? But I mean, so that's one thing, but I also think in the Elon case in particular, it's just wild that, like, because you would think, I mean, look, not that this would be the kind of argument that I personally would be most ideologically comfortable making, but like you could even just kind of argue from a very mainstream kind of like national security perspective that it's insane that we let this guy have this much control.
Yeah.
Yeah, which,
Access.
yeah, yeah, totally, right. And by the way, I mean, obviously, the American system does not generally make it easy to nationalize things. There's like the takings clause, the Constitution, which says you have to compensate, owners, and that, like, there's like restrictions about public purposes and all that stuff. But in this case, it would actually be really easy, right? Because there's the Defense Production Act, which like sort of specifically exists. I mean, like from the Korean War to enable nationalizations specifically for like war, national security, kinds of purposes. And if you look back at the history of different things that different presidents have invoked the Defense Production Act for, I mean, a lot of them had a way more tenuous connection to anything like military than this does.
I mean, you mentioned in your piece that even Steve Bannon commented about nationalizing Elon's was it SpaceX or Starlink?
Yeah, yeah. So Starlink is within SpaceX. So if you
Okay.
nationalize SpaceX, that would include it. Yeah, no, he did, right. I mean, which is like kind of funny in a lot of ways that he did. Comrade Steve. But you know, he, like, I mean, he's always been like, he plays a very ambiguous game with it, of course. I think for obvious reasons, given who he's allied with and all that stuff. But he's always been the person, like the major figure of the Trump coalition, who's most willing to make economically populist noises about certain issues. So it would make sense that if anybody said it, he would. I mean, of course, even Steve Bannon, is very leery about, going in that direction. So he was just like, well, we can take it over until they have more stable leadership or something like that, right? But like, but it is interesting that he said it, and I think it's sorry, I'm getting distracted by the helicopter noises.
Well, sorry.
No, 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 it's fine. This has just been my life for the last week. Although I did actually see, I just, as we were talking, I got an email from the New York Times, says breaking news: Judge blocks Trump from deploying National Guard in Los Angeles. So
Oh,
yeah, right. Uh, but but yeah, right. I mean, it is interesting that even Bannon said that. I mean, in some ways, I think that does speak to like what an obvious connection it is to make.
well, do you think people are waking up? Like, let me kind of try to include what's going on in LA to this statement. When we found out kids were being separated from the adults they were crossing the border with, seeking
Yeah.
asylum,
Uh,
and then being held in dog kennels, people got upset.
hmm
People ran to the border to help the kids out. I
hmm
was I was around when that was happening. Not here. I was doing a festival in El Paso.
Yeah.
It was kind of amazing to see the amount of humanitarian aid that just came when people found that out. Now, Trump's kind of shock and awe campaign of immigration reform, right, where he wants to just snatch up everybody brown, whether you're here as a protected citizen or not. None of that matters. People are coming out in droves to protest this. What's going to make people wake up to this level of privatization and individual undemocratic control, or are we just comfortable with it at this point?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I think we are pretty comfortable with it. I mean, which is not to say that that's never going to change. I mean, obviously, my politics and your politics wouldn't make sense if not for the assumption that it was at least possible that it would eventually change. But that doesn't mean I have the magic formula in my back pocket for what it's going to take to get it to change. I mean, something like because I think the difference between the two is that something like immigration has swung back and forth a bit, even just in the last several years.
Mm-hmm.
That like some of the stuff you're talking about from the first Trump administration, actually, like the backlash to that meant that there was like more public support for a more liberal position on immigration than there had been in a long time. Because so many people were so disgusted by it. But then, under, Biden, I think that even though, as we obviously know, a lot of the right wing rhetoric about immigration under Biden was totally disconnected from reality. It was ridiculous. But nevertheless, I think enough things were going on that fed into that narrative that they were, if you think about the way that the right was able to very misleadingly link the fentanyl epidemic with undocumented immigration, even though we know that most of it that's been seized has been seized to places that have nothing to do with that. And if you look at things like I mean, the very, like it's not wrong that like there's certain influxes of asylum seekers that like really overloaded the immigration court system in some border states, and that then the kind of, I mean, as morally vile as it is, I think that kind of stunt where you took the busloads or plane loads of asylum seekers and just dumped them out in like big blue cities far from the border, I think was really good PR for for
Yeah.
that side.
Yeah.
Like it really worked for them.
Mm-hmm.
And now who knows? I mean, now like it's all a little ambiguous. The country seems very split about it, but I think it's possible that Trump is overplaying his hand again so much now that it's going to swing back. Right? That would kind of make sense. That'd be like within. I think that'd be well within the range of what you'd expect, right? That like that what Trump is doing causes a backlash, and public opinion kind of switches back again. So that's like a kind of back and forth pendulum, because that's like one of the main things we're fighting about in American politics. Whereas the sort of realities of extreme economic inequality and oligarchy, I mean, this is like that's so much of that's just kind of the background noise of it's like it's so often been the thing that we don't even argue about because it's just kind of taken for granted. We're used to it. But that doesn't mean that it's impossible, right? I think certainly even going back to Occupy Wall Street, for all the very real stupidities of Occupy Wall Street, one reason we are all really excited when that happened was because it's like, oh my God, have we when's the last time people were paying this much attention to economic inequality in the United States?
Yeah.
And certainly the Bernie campaigns, we're riding that sentiment, and even within the last several months, right? The fighting oligarchy tour and all that stuff. I mean, like which like some of those rallies have been attended by lots of people with no previous sort of involvement in Bernie type politics. it's just, it's just kind of, people who, are disgusted by the Trump administration and Doge and all of that stuff, who, like, kind of gravitated towards this. So, I think it's possible, right? Like, I don't, I'm not ready to throw in the towel about this, but, like, it's right now, I don't know yet what it would take to get the dam to break in quite that way on this.
It's like people don't even watch RoboCop
Well, maybe that's it,
or
right? Maybe
Alien, or they're just getting the wrong thing from those movies. Some say nationalization is too radical or unrealistic. What is your response to that?
well, again, I would say that in this particular case, we have the Defense Production Act, which involves, like, a very, like, straightforward, pre-established. It's not like we have to, like, pass some new law to enable this to happen. Like the mechanism already exists within, current law. I mean, like, literally, if you wanted to, I think, Trump could, like, do an executive order to do this tomorrow, and I think he'd have a good chance of surviving legal challenges, because this seems to be just what the Defense Production Act is for. And, again, if you look at what previous presidents have used it for, like, like, even as recently as things like, producing more personal protective equipment during COVID and all that, I think the connection is much more straightforward in this case, right?
Mhm.
So I think that it's really not. I think the reason that it, and again, like, if you just kind of look at the long history of all the things that, within the history of, like, liberal democratic capitalist nations have been put into public ownership at various times in various countries. I mean, I think that, like, look, this the space program. I mean, when we we had that in the, like, when that was at its height, right? It was, like, taken for granted. Of course, this would be a public function, and, similarly, anything to do with the military. I mean, like, during the World War II era, Korea, Vietnam, of course, that was just taken for granted. Obviously, that's public, right? Like, really, the new thing is saying that it's fine for this stuff to be privatized, right? So if it's already too radical to make that stuff public again, I mean, we've really slipped very far, very fast.
Well, in closing, how do we get off the neoliberal death wage? How do we not all become citizens of the Titan submergible? Or is it too late? Are we strapped in? Are we
Look,
strapped in now?
I don't know. I mean, I refuse to believe that it's too late. I think that, I mean, I think if nothing else, I think that the basic contradiction between labor and capital that's just built into the structure of any capitalist society means that there's always, it doesn't mean, like, good guys are going to inevitably win or anything, very far from it, right? But, like, it does mean that there's always going to be tension and conflict and the possibility of something better. I think that's just, like, a baseline, as long as we have capitalism. And, and look, as bad as things have gotten, they have gone very, very bad in a lot of ways. I mean, my God, right? I mean, I'm just fucking sitting here in Los Angeles listening to helicopters, because the city has been, the subject of some very bizarre authoritarian antics, in the last week. And, you can't understand the rise of Trump and that kind of, like, right wing pseudo populist authoritarianism without understanding the failures of neoliberalism over, the last decades leading up to that. That's all true, right? But as bad as things have gotten, it is also true that explicitly left egalitarian politics are a bigger part of the mix in American political discourse now than they were for most of my lifetime or your lifetime. Like
Mhm.
like like that is just objectively true, right? I mean, that we have, again, I mean, the sort of biggest turnouts that anybody any Democrat was getting were, for those fighting oligarchy tours. Um, I, like AOC, whatever, I know, guys, whatever criticisms you have of her, right? Like, is like you look at the polls, it's like a real deal contender, if she decides to run for president in 2028, all that. And I'm not saying that like all of that means that we're on the verge of having all of our problems be over and we'll just live under socialism and I don't know. I'll still do my podcast, but I'm just going to talk about movies and stuff
Because everything will be fine.
because everything's going to be fine, right?
Fine.
You know, definitely not saying that, but I think if you're looking for glimmers of hope, I think it's very easy to get trapped in the news cycle and trapped in this horizon where you're not really thinking about anything that happened longer than 6 months ago. And, I think if you have a little bit of a broader view, right, for like how grim the prospects look for any kind of serious left politics for, most of like the last, I don't know, let's say 80 years since World War II, right?
Mhm.
I think there are real glimmers of hope to be found.
What do you think happens shifting totally to foreign policy? Israel just bombed Iran.
Yeah.
What do you think happens moving forward? Are we seeing proxy World War III?
Man, I hope it's just proxy. Yeah, I mean, I have no idea. Things are very fluid and chaotic. After the last 5 months, I'm not. I think it's time to retire my crystal ball. Right? Like I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not going to pretend that I know what's going to happen. I think that the thing that I'm sure about is the if then that if this turns into an all-out war, and especially if the U.S. gets drawn in. I mean, that's just kind of hard to overstate how catastrophic that would be. For us, I mean, most of all for them, of course, but I mean for us, for the region, for the world. Like I think that could, I think that could make the war in Iraq uh, look like relatively small change by comparison if that happened, right?
And that's
So
frightening.
that
That's
is very,
frightening.
very frightening.
We the last 20 years have not been good for the United States in trying to have military presence in the Middle East.
Yeah.
So I know you're busy and have to get out. Is there anything you want to pitch in closing?
Not really. No, I mean, I'll just say like, no. I mean, I'm good. I mean, I have a well. Actually, no. I guess I'll say two things. Right.
Mhm.
One is if you watch GTAA on Monday, we've got Natasha Zapata talking about her book "Another World Is Possible." I actually pre-recorded that this morning, and if you do want to cheer up a little bit, it's actually, as she's been on this show.
Mhm.
It's a good book to read for that. Sort of looking at successful reforms that have been implemented in different countries all around the world. And I don't know. I also think like there's, I think there's a lot of psychological value to logging off in general, and even if you want to spend like your logged off time thinking about politics, like it's like I don't know. I mean, I was just literally on my way back to where I stay here. I passed by like a little protest, and it actually like really cheered me up because it was like so. It was such a wholesome protest. Like it was like there were like sign, like the kind of signs you'd expect, like hands off immigrants, 8647, and like people waving American flags and stuff. There were like little kids there, and cars honking in support. It was like, it's It's actually makes me feel kind of good. Unlike doom scrolling Twitter all the time, which makes me feel very bad.
Yeah, that's why I don't do it. Well, I look forward to your return here to not so sunny Mexico. I think the sun will come out by the time you get here. Be very safe in Los Angeles, and I will see you soon. That is Ben Burgis. I've given an argument. Wherever you are watching or listening to this show, there is a link in the description. Before we even write the description of the show, there's a link to Ben's article in Jacobin. Of course, you can catch him every Monday at 5 p.m. Pacific time doing his podcast, Give Them an Argument. On that note, there's no champagne room tonight. As I think I might be going to see my family. So thank you guys. And I am